Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Darati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaisnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sagana Raghunatam Itam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Paridana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamsha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhavacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. So, welcome to our continued discussion of chapter 7. So, we've been discussing about knowledge of the absolute and how various personalities surrender to Krishna with some different motives. That's how we concluded last week's discussion. Prior to that, we discussed about the 4 types of people who do not surrender to Krishna. And so now we're going to see, speaking about others who surrender but not to Krishna. And it brings us to this important understanding. Krishna is giving knowledge. But knowledge, it leads to realization when there is humility. When we understand that we don't know, and we approach this knowledge in a humble mood, then actually the heart transforms and turns into actual realization and understanding. Because in this chapter alone, we see so much clear, crisp, and strong support for just surrendering to Krishna. He is everything. Apara and Para Shakti. Our entire existence is predicated on the Supreme Lord. And one with some knowledge of that, coupled with humility, would realize the importance of surrendering to the Supreme Lord. But it is the lack of humility or the presence of false ego that leads one away. So now Krishna says in the 20th verse of this chapter, those whose intelligence has been stolen by material desires surrender unto demigods and follow the particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own natures. So, why do some surrender to demigods? Krishna is saying that their intelligence has been stolen. Vritta Gyan. Stolen by material desires. So Prabhupada speaks about in the purport here that everyone should surrender to Krishna. Even if those desiring liberation, those full of material desires, and of course those are free and pure of all such contamination. All should surrender to Krishna. Because one should understand that Krishna is the master of all. There is no purpose that cannot be fulfilled by Krishna. Nor is there any other person that can fulfill a purpose that Krishna cannot. He is the all-in-one. So no matter what your position is, what your state of consciousness is, there is never a reason to look elsewhere but to Krishna. Even if one is full of material desires, as Krishna has spoken previously about those Sakam devotees who approach him with desires. Right? So Krishna here says less intelligent, stolen intelligence. Why? He's going to explain in a couple of verses that they're seeking temporary and limited fruits, right? When eternal results are available to those who surrender to Krishna. So if you can get temporary and limited or eternal and unlimited, somebody who would choose the lesser option is considered less intelligent. Right? Nobody goes to the doctor and asks for temporary relief from their ailment. They want permanent relief. So Srila Prabhupada speaks about, he says that the goal is small. Some limited enjoyment. A few $1 million. It seems big to us. But relative to what bhakti can offer, it is very tiny. So one who pursues this path is not very intelligent, according to Krishna. They don't know where to take shelter, where to find refuge. Just like if one builds their shelter right at the banks of a river during the rainy season, the flood season, is that intelligent? No. One knows this is going to be a temporary shelter. It's not going to work. So one who knowingly works to please the demigods for some material desires is not very intelligent. Again, according to Krishna. So why do they go to the demigods then instead of Krishna? If Krishna is the master of all. So Prabhupada is explaining that because they have so many material desires and think they can get faster results by approaching the demigods. They are consumed mostly by the lower modes of nature, passion and ignorance, and thus their intelligence is thus affected. That's why Krishna says that they worship according to their own natures. So Krishna here is referring to, their nature they have acquired from their interactions with the material modes. So now Krishna will give if you go to him with material desires. But he gives in amounts that are good for us. And sometimes it takes longer to get it because it is not good for us. And he also purifies us of these desires. That is the benefit of approaching Krishna, even if you are full of material desires. And even sometimes he takes it all away. Srila Prabhupada, talks about in his journey how his whole business was wiped out, and he considered it the utmost blessing of Krishna because it allowed him to then render service to Krishna. So the worshippers who are in distress, in desire of money or curious, these three Sakam worshippers, they are considered pious because they'll ultimately be purified of these desires and thus will attain the eternal result of returning back to the spiritual world. Okay? So, as we know, the devotee must be free of material desires ultimately. And this purity comes from devotional service. So Krishna is establishing here that to worship the demigods for your material desires is not very intelligent. Because when you worship Krishna, you get a better result. Yes, fulfillment of your desires in dosages that are good for you, as well as purification ultimately of those desires, so that you can get an even better result, which is eternal bliss. So someone who knowingly chooses a lesser option is certainly considered less intelligent. It is not an insult. It is just descriptive, comparing and contrasting. So here we see the intelligence is stolen by the material desires, meaning the desires become so strong that lust in the heart becomes so strong that it overpowers their intelligence. And we have seen the power of lust in chapters 2 and 3. How one knows that something is bad for them, yet they go on doing it because that lust overpowers their knowledge. It is known that this activity will kill you, and yet it carries on. Okay. Now, see how Krishna reciprocates with such a devotee. I am in everyone's heart as super soul. As soon as one desires to worship some demigod, I make his faith steady so that he can devote himself to that particular deity. Now this is amazing. How liberal Krishna is. He fulfills our desire even if we don't want to surrender to him. His ask of us to surrender to him is not for his benefit. It is not a selfish statement. It is for our benefit. So Krishna, seated in our heart as super soul, witnesses our desires and thus inspires us to act according to our desires. So Krishna does not throw us to the curb and say, hey, you don't want to surrender to me? Good luck to you. No. To those who even don't follow him, he says, I make his faith steady so that he can devote himself. Krishna is the source of that faith. He has no envy of anyone. He has none. He says, it is me who makes your faith steady to that person. It's amazing to see. So we have to be careful, because Krishna does not interfere with our limited independence. He doesn't interfere. If you want to do something based on your qualification, he'll make it happen for us. Sometimes we wonder, why does the Supreme Lord give us all these sinful things? Why he gave intelligence to manufacture, so many intoxicants, drugs and cigarettes and different types of intoxicants. Why he gave that intelligence? Why he gave the intelligence to make so many different types of weapons and other things? Because if there was only spiritual activities and spiritual paraphernalia in the world, there would be no choice for us to practice. We would be forced upon it. So Krishna wants our love to be based on our desires, our choice. So to have real independence, all the facilities must be there. So the facilities are provided, and it is up to us to decide. Just like a child. When a child lives in the home of their parents, they have very limited choices. But their independence is experienced once they leave. Then they can choose what to do, what they don't want to do. So like that, Krishna makes everything available. If you want to worship the demigods for some material desires, it is he alone that makes that faith steady. But it's not just faith. Let's see. 22. Endowed with such a faith, he endeavors to worship a particular demigod and obtain his desires. But in actuality, these benefits are bestowed by me alone. So Krishna is the ultimate giver. So we said endowed with such faith. Again, it is only Krishna's mercy that allows one to even worship the devatas. Only by Krishna's mercy. So our faith to worship a demigod, it comes from Krishna. The demigods cannot inspire such a faith to be worshipped. Only Krishna can inspire this type of faith. That's very important for us to understand. Only Krishna can inspire such a faith in the heart of the living entity. But not only the faith, but that's step one. There's 4 pieces to what Krishna does. First is this faith. Then the fruits themselves, whatever it is that is given in that worship, that also comes from Krishna. The demigods cannot give any fruits without the approval and sanction of Krishna. Not only approval and sanction, but the provision by Krishna. I'll come back to this one in a second. That's the second aspect. Third, the process to worship the demigods. They come from the Vedas. Do this yajna, chant these mantras. Where the Vedas came from? Krishna. So Krishna gives the process to worship them. And finally, he gives the ability. He has said early in this chapter, I'm the ability in man. So our ability to perform these yajnas is given by Krishna. So Krishna gives 1, the faith, 2, the fruits themselves, 3, the process, and 4, the ability. This is how liberal the Lord is. If you want to pursue this path, it is only He that is the enabler. This is not a competition for love. Krishna has nothing to compete with. He is the Supreme Lord. He is simply going to reciprocate with us according to our desires. He'll give knowledge, and then it is up to us to choose. But we must never forget, not even a blade of grass can sway in the wind without the sanction of Krishna. We can only worship Krishna because he allows it. We can only worship the devatas because he allows it. Imagine if all worshippers really understood this point. Both the devatas, the demigods, and the worshippers of them are fully dependent on Krishna. I said I'd come back to the point of the fruits. So the material results, where do they come from? Well, they come from Krishna. Because he is the proprietor, the creator. The jiva tattva, as we have always discussed, we bring nothing into this world. Right? So the devatas, they are also jiva tattvas. They are empowered jiva tattvas, empowered servants of Krishna. But they cannot create anything. None of these material boons they can create. They are not the doer also. When Krishna says prakrute kriyamanani, that applies also to the devatas. They are not the doer. They are the empowered agents. So the fruits only come from the supreme proprietor. And there is only one proprietor. And that is Krishna. And because he is a proprietor, he is the Purusha, the enjoyer. But if we want to be the enjoyer, then we go down this path, which is, again, not very intelligent. So this means that when we worship the devatas, we are actually indirectly worshiping Krishna. Because the demigods take our worship and offer Krishna that boon. And then passes it back to us. That is the irony. We're getting it from Krishna. We know in shopping, if you have a chance to buy from the wholesaler or buy from the manufacturer directly, where you'll buy the product from? Always the manufacturer. It's cheaper, more efficient, better process. So this is the consistent the statement. Prabhupada talks about this independence. The devatas, they have no independence. They are parts of the body of Vishnu. We know that any part of the body is dependent on the whole. The arm alone has no function. The arm disconnected from the body has no independent existence. So the Devatas, they work in dependence on Krishna. That is their function. So why then would a living entity worship the Devatas? It is due to strong lust for material desires. That is it. That is it. Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, I quote, because worship of demigods is material and devotional service to the Supreme Lord is completely spiritual. Very important point he makes here. The demigod worship is not a spiritual activity. It is a material activity. Because the purpose of that activity is not to progress the spirit soul to its eternal constitutional position. It is to fulfill some material desire. And thus, it is a bodily platform activity. It is a material activity. It is a regulated material activity, so better than unregulated. But we should not confuse the two, which is often the case. Because the objective is advancement of the material body. And thus, it's a material activity. It's spiritual when the purpose is spiritual, related to the soul. So, this Prabhupada makes this comment very, very carefully, very important for us, that he says devotional service to the Supreme Lord and worship of the demigod cannot be on the same platform. They're not the same platform. So we should be very clear in our mind that they're not. Next verse on this section, 23. Men of small intelligence worship the demigods, and their fruits are limited and temporary. Those who worship the demigods go to the planets of demigods, but my devotees ultimately reach my supreme planet. So what is the destination achieved? Is it all the same? No. You go to whom you worship. If you buy a plane ticket to Miami, you cannot go to New York. You'll go to Miami. Very simple logic. The concept is you go to whom you worship. The idea that worship anyone, they all lead to the same place, it's all the same. That is very conventionally discussed. But it is not the fact. Krishna is establishing that. You only get Krishna if you surrender to him. And his place is eternal. Everything else, temporary. So small intelligence, again, is used. Men of small intelligence. Why? Because the fruits that they are working for are temporary and limited. Who aspires for a few millions of dollars, maybe 1,000-year life, a beautiful spouse, or some intelligence? You still have to deal with birth and death, old age and disease. You have so much troubles that you have to deal with. And because they're limited and temporary, you're full of anxiety. You're fearful of losing them. It won't satisfy that lust because it's limited. So, it's of course not very intelligent. It's not very intelligent because there is a better, unlimited, eternal option available. If this was the best you could get, well, you say, well, that's the best I can get. But Krishna is saying that one can reach my supreme planet, which he's going to describe in the next chapter, in the middle of the 8th chapter. And to say, it's an eternal place. There is no birth, death, old age, disease. And the bliss is unlimited. So why do demigods give temporary results? Because the demigods themselves are temporary. They're enhanced, very advanced jiva tattvas. So because they are temporary, Prabhupada explains, the fruits that they can give are also temporary. Krishna is eternal, so he can give eternal. Krishna Bhakti. So these Sakam worshippers, the Arta, Arti, and the Jignasu, because when they worship Krishna, they ultimately get purified. So they'll reach the eternal abode. So, important point, that it's better to worship Krishna even if you have material desires. But ultimately, one must become free of the material desires, because they are impediments of going back home, back to Godhead. One must be Anyabilashita Shunyam, pure devotional service. So it's better to worship Krishna if you are stuck with the material desires, because he'll help us purify of them. So we must not, this is not a sanction to go to Krishna with your material desires. It is the way of saying, this is the way to get rid of them, because they are impediments. So it's not approved to go. And Prabhupada talks about in the purport that the logic presented, that, hey, since the demigods are the limbs of the body of Vishnu, worshipping any of them is the same as worshipping Vishnu. And such logic may be presented. But Prabhupada defeats that logic, and that's not true. Just like you cannot feed any part of the body, you have to feed the stomach. So you can't feed any part of the body of Vishnu, assume to get the same result. If you feed the eyeballs, will it work? No, it's not going to work. So each particular part of the body has a function, has a purpose, has an activity. So worshiping the demigods, does not create the same result as worshiping Krishna. And he makes this very clearly in this point. Right? So very different results. One is permanent and eternal, worshiping Krishna. One is limited and temporary, worshiping the demigods. So we should understand this very clearly. And one final point that, 2 points we'll make as we conclude this section, that the demigod worship now, there is a process to worship them in a way that leads to permanent results. And we see this in Srimad Bhagavatam, the pastimes of Bharat Maharaj. Bharat Maharaj was performing so many different yagyas and worships. But his worship was in the mood of worshiping the demigods as servants of Krishna. He was worshiping them in respect to their position as servants of Krishna. He knew who is the ultimate Bhoktaram Yagna Tapasam, the ultimate beneficiary of all those yagyas. So the purpose was not to gain boons, but the purpose was to appreciate their service to the Supreme Lord. So that is a mood in which one can worship the demigods. But when we speak of that, the worship, that is very rarely the actual purpose. Now we have to come to a very important point here. We have spent 4 verses talking about less intelligent, stolen intelligence, who would worship the demigods. We must be very aware and careful that we should never, ever disrespect the demigods. Because the demigods are empowered servants to Krishna. So though we may be surrendering to Krishna, they are his devotees also. So our worship may be to Krishna, but we should be respectful of their position as very dear servants to Krishna. So we may not approach them to fulfill our material desires, but we certainly should not lose respect for any of the demigods, because they are performing a very important service. Because that worship, for some living entities, hopefully is a progressive state to Krishna Bhakti. So, sometimes in our misunderstanding of Krishna consciousness, when we become singularly focused in the worship of Krishna, we become either unintentionally or sometimes intentionally disrespectful to demigods. And that is strictly prohibited. That is not recommended by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, by Krishna himself. So though Krishna is speaking in very stark terms, we should be careful and understand the importance of their position and not minimize it through our minds. So we respect all, but we know where to place our worship, our surrender. That is to Krishna. Okay? So now we'll go to the next section of this chapter. 24th verse. Unintelligent men who do not know me perfectly think that I, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, was impersonal before and have now assumed this personality. Due to their small knowledge, they do not know my higher nature, which is imperishable and supreme. So abudaya, it means even less intelligence or no intelligence. Krishna says unintelligent here. Right? Previously he said less intelligent. Some, but not much. Here he says no intelligence. So less than who? Less than the Devata worshippers, the demigod worshippers. Because the impersonalists, they deny the eternal form of Krishna. Prabhupada gives quite detailed explanations in the purport. Krishna's form is not like ours. We take a form and change our body based on our karma. We are separate from our body. But Krishna and his body are one. It is all spiritual. He is his form. We saw this in the 4th chapter. So this Krishna on the battlefield, that is his eternal form. When Krishna assumes the baby form, he does so simply to please his devotees, not by the force of laws of nature. When we get old, we are forced to get old by the laws of time. But Krishna is not such. So the impersonalists think Krishna has temporarily assumed this form, that his form is temporary, it is Maya. So he is repeatedly establishing himself as the ultimate truth, as he did in the beginning of this chapter, and he's going to in the next couple of verses. And Krishna having a form doesn't limit him. If he is 6 foot tall and 180 pounds, it doesn't mean that's all he is. No, because to say Krishna has only a form is also limiting. He has both personal and impersonal features. He has everything. And we see the potency of his form. In Dwarka, he expanded himself into 16,108 Krishnas. And in each of those forms, he was reciprocating with the queens in a unique and different way. He maintained a personal relationship with each of them. Great munis, by mystical powers, they can expand themselves also, up to 8 forms. But all 8 have to do the exact same thing. But Krishna's form is so powerful, he can expand unlimitedly, and each can have its own existence. As he did when Lord Brahma stole the cowherd boys and calves. His performance was so perfect that even the mothers could not detect that this is not my child. Now, who can do such a thing? If you bring an exact replica of your child to mother in an instant will know the difference. This is not my child. But Krishna's expansion form was so powerful that he went undetected for 1 full year. So When we say he has a form, understand it is an unlimited form. Prabhupada talks in the purport here. Now, what is the only way that we can understand and learn about Krishna's form and pastimes and names? It is only by devotional service. He'll tell us later, Bhakti Amama Bijanati, that no amount of study will reveal this truth. Millions of years of studying Vedanta, it won't happen. It is only by devotional service. So let's see what is covering the impersonalist view. Why can't they see Krishna in his eternal form? He says in the 25th verse, I am never manifested to foolish and unintelligent. For them I am covered by my internal potency, and therefore they do not know that I am unborn and infallible. So Krishna's form is eternal. Why doesn't everybody see it? Because of Maya. Because of Krishna's internal potency, the Maya Shakti, he covers their vision. Why? Because in their heart, they don't want to see Krishna. They don't want to believe that Krishna exists because it defeats their objective of trying to be God. So Krishna allows them, okay, Maya, cover them from me. No problem. So even during the Mahabharata, Krishna was present. But only few really understood he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So though everybody was seeing his form, most considered him just some ordinary human being. Just another one of us. They were covered by Maya, by illusion. So this ability to understand Krishna, the Maya potency must be removed. And only Krishna can do that. Lord Brahma says in the Srimad Bhagavatam, after having understood the mistakes, he says, one may be able to count the number of atoms in the universe. You might have so much intellectual ability, you can count the number of atoms in the universe. But even with that type of intelligence, you cannot understand Krishna's energy and potency. That's how grand he is. But this is not known to the unintelligent. Now, Krishna clarifies a doubt. O Arjuna, as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I know everything that has happened in the past, all that is happening in the present, and in all that is yet to come. I also know all living entities, but me no one knows. So Krishna is not covered by Maya. So we are all covered or subject to be covered by Maya, but Krishna is never covered. Okay? Just the example I think Borijan Prabhu gives is you have a curtain on the stage. When you have a curtain on the stage, the audience cannot see what is on the stage, the actors on stage, nor can the actors see the audience because there's a curtain. So this Maya is not like that. We in the audience cannot see Krishna on stage, but Krishna can see us. Always. So we may be covered by Maya, but he is never covered. Maya is Krishna's servant, is his inferior energy. He is the controller of Maya, not the other way around. So Prabhupada gives the example that the sun, we may not see the sun by the presence of clouds. But the clouds are not covering the sun. It simply is standing in the way of our vision. So similarly, we may not see Krishna, but Maya is not covering Krishna. So thus, he says that I know all living entities. Sometimes we worry. I'm doing this service, but somebody else is getting the credit. Somebody else is taking all the responsibility. No one's noticing what I'm doing. Why we should worry? Krishna is seeing. He says, I know all. He is not covered. So never to lament. And why does Krishna make this point? I know past, present, and future. This is establishing that his form that he's describing is different from all of our form. We are not the same. The impersonalists suggest that Krishna has a temporary material form like all of us. If that was the case, like us, he would not remember his past life. He doesn't have a past life. Right? So Prabhupada talks about when we change bodies, we forget our past lives because we are not this body. We have a temporary form. But Krishna's always his eternal form. So he remembers everything. So he makes this statement to help us understand his is eternal. So the impersonalists who have no intelligence, who suggest that his form is Maya, couldn't be more wrong. I guess one final comment about Maya. Krishna allows himself to be covered by his yoga Maya potency in the spiritual world, which is inconceivable to us. But by doing so, Krishna is able to enjoy an even higher rasa of exchanges with his devotees. He really feels the motherly affection of Mother Yashoda when he is allowed to forget that he is the supreme controller and creator of everything. So it's just not an actor, but actually experiencing that mood. So that is on a higher platform, not relevant for today, but just an important note that we can remember in understanding Maya. So Maya covers the living entities of seeing Krishna, but he is never covered. So now what to do? How to overcome Maya? So the final 4 verses, Krishna is discussing that. O scion of Bharata, O conqueror of the foe, all living entities are born into delusion, bewildered by dualities arisen from desire and hate. So how we became born into this delusion? Icha and Dvesha, desire and hate. We had envy of Krishna and some desire to be separate from him. And this separated us from our pure knowledge that we are eternal servants of Krishna. So this desire and hate, they only exist in the material world because they are illusion. And we see it. We like so many things and we dislike so many other things. I love spinach, but I hate eggplant. Actually, I love both, but I'm just making an example. So this duality of desire and hate, it exists in the material world. And what's interesting is that what we desire today, we hate tomorrow. And vice versa. That's how delusional this world is. We get tired of so many things. I love this, movie. And after watching it so many times, we begin to despise it. That is the nature of the material world. We're always vacillating because nothing is satisfying. Nothing is pleasing. So the desires never become satisfied. Always one is leading to another and to another. I want this, I want that. So the dualities of good and bad, hot and cold, honor and dishonor, this only is present in the material world. In the spiritual world, there is no such thing as I like this and don't like that. Everything is on the absolute platform. It is all pleasing. And thus, there's never any dissatisfaction. Oh, Krishna is doing this pastime today. I wish he was doing that one. No, because each activity is equally and perfectly pleasing. Yet, there is still variety. It is not that Krishna does the same pastime every day. There is still full of variety. But there is never any feeling of, I wish Because as soon as I wish, it means there is something unsatisfied. There are kalpavrikshas everywhere. And that desire is fulfilled. So there is no unfulfilled desire in the spiritual world. So this icha, this desires, they're instantly fulfilled. Not, oh, I got this service, but I wish I had that service. No, everything is pleasing. So this that we experience in the material world, these this and that, these good and bad, hot and cold, it only exists in the material world. It doesn't exist in the spiritual world. And that is what makes it so perfect and perfectly pleasing. 28. Persons who have acted piously in the previous lives and this life, and whose sinful actions are completely eradicated, are free from the dualities of delusion, and they engage themselves in my service with determination. So now, any hope to overcome this icha and dvesha, this desire and hate? Krishna says all are born into delusion. Right? That's what he said in the prior verse. All living entities are born into delusion. So what to do? Yes, we can overcome it by devotional service. But how do we start when we are fully delusional? It is our piety that attracts the mercy of the pure devotee, who will then engage us in bhakti. The piety alone is not going to bring about bhakti, because the piety itself is also a material activity. Good karma, doing good karma, is a material activity. That cannot bring out bhakti. But the piety, it attracts the favor of a pure devotee. And this is the duty of all devotees, as Prabhupada talks about, to share this message with pious souls, to save them. Otherwise, there's no chance to be free from this delusion. One must get the glance of a pure devotee. And that association is so powerful. And what happens when we get the association of pure devotee? We engage in bhakti, devotional service, and thus become free from sins. Now, Srila Baladev Yudhabhushan gives a very beautiful commentary on this, that the glance of the pure devotee is so powerful, so potent, that it even purifies the impious. Because we may say, well, okay, for the pious, they can be saved. Well, what about the impious? Well, our Acharya's comment, that glance is so powerful that even the impious can develop the faith in bhakti and thus become free from the dualities and understand Krishna and surrender to him. And we saw no better example than Srila Prabhupada, his glance fell upon in New York, in San Francisco, in LA, in all corners of the world that he traveled. The most fallen of the fallen. There was no piety. Yet his glance was so powerful. He was able to imbibe this mood of devotion, overcoming that impiety. And that is this power of Krishna's devotees. So, our goal should be how we can have some association with a pure devotee. When a pure devotee desires that someone becomes a devotee, Krishna makes it happen. If Srila Prabhupada desires us to become surrendered to Krishna, then it will happen. If our spiritual masters desire us to become pure devotees, then it will happen. Because Krishna fulfills everyone's desires. But of course, he fulfills the desires of his pure devotees. So our goal is to have a pure devotee desire for us to be pure. And then it will happen. That should be our aim. Serve a devotee so lovingly, so purely, that he prays for us or she prays for us to Krishna. Then our purity will come. So this this power is so strong. You know, whoever Lord Nityananda Prabhu set his glance upon, they achieved the mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. We see this in Chaitanya Charitamrita and Chaitanya Bhagavata. Whoever he looked at became pure devotees. So our goal, come into the glance of a pure devotee of the Lord, and hope, pray that they'll desire us to become a pure devotee. Because if they desire it, it will happen. Because Krishna is so dear to his pure devotees. So this is how one can overcome this Icha and Dvesha. Even though we are all born in delusion, there is great hope. 29 and 30 now. Intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death take refuge in me in devotional service. They are actually Brahman because they entirely know everything about transcendental activities. So here we see another Sakam devotee because they want liberation, free from birth and death. So they can achieve that by going to the Vaikuntha planets. Now, must remember that with this desire, one cannot achieve Goloka Vrindavan, right? Because of that desire. But they can still at least reach. So now 29 and 30 are describing these 6 terms that Arjuna will inquire about in the next chapter. So these last 2 verses are a transition to chapter 8 about attaining the Supreme. So we'll learn about these 3 terms described in this verse: Brahman, karma or activities, and Adhyatma, the jiva. Okay? So Prabhupada talks about in the purport to this verse that, Aham Brahmasmi. Yes, we are Brahman, the spirit soul. But remember, we are not the supreme Brahman. That is Krishna, Parabrahma. We are Brahman. Finally, those in full consciousness of me who know me, the Supreme Lord, to be the governing principle of the material manifestation of the demigods and of all methods of sacrifice, can understand and know me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even at the time of death. So 3 more terms here. Adibhuta, the governing principle of the material manifestation. Adidaiva, the governing principle of the demigods. And Adiyagya, the governing principle of the sacrifices. So these 3 aspects of Krishna's supreme control and governance lead again one to know him even at the time of death. So we'll see these in the next chapter, these 6 terms. Now, there's the commentary in the purport about this determined faith that I just want to spend a minute on before concluding. This Dridra Vrata. Prabhupada talks about this is the beginning of our Krishna consciousness. This determined faith. Right? When one has faith that surrender to Krishna is the only means of success, then we can begin devotional service. This faith is the first step. And that faith comes from association with a pure devotee. By association, we understand and acquire this faith. The unintelligent, the less intelligent, the miscreants, their faith is in so many other aspects. But it is only faith in Krishna that can lead to our success. Prabhupada summarizes the chapter in the purport. And we know this chapter, it began with this continuation of the 47th verse of the 6th chapter, which talks about how to become fully Krishna conscious, to abide with him in faith. So Krishna began to speak about how to see Krishna everywhere, how to understand he is the essence of everything, and how he is the controller. So how he is present everywhere through his Apara and Parashakti, how he is the essence of everything like the taste of water, in how he's the controller. Everything is working under his jurisdiction. And if we see this, then one naturally would surrender. But not everybody sees it due to Maya. This Devi Hesha. Right? We talked about to overcome this illusion, just surrender to Krishna. Mamevaya prapatyante, mayamitam tarantite. One can overcome this Maya. But not everyone does it. Who doesn't do it? The four types of miscreants. They don't surrender to Krishna. The grossly foolish, the lowest of mankind, the Naradama, the Maya Praktikya Gyans, those who Maya has stolen their intelligence, and the outright demons who are inimical, who fight with Krishna, the Asuras. But there are four types of pious souls who surrender to Krishna with some goal, with some desire. But they are pious. And then Krishna discussed, as we talked in these verses, about those who surrender to other persons, the demigods, being overcome by their material desires. Those desires steal their intelligence. Ritta Gyan. Right? Their intelligence has been stolen by these material desires. And so how to overcome all of this? By devotional service. And now Krishna will begin to speak how to attain the Supreme Lord. He has given knowledge of the Absolute, and now in the next chapter, he'll discuss how to attain. So this is chapter 7. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Jayananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki. Any comments or questions today? Hare Krishna, Buddhi Dandas.
Because of my conditioning, I keep like the same question again.
No problem.
722 we discussed like demigods are the parts of body parts of Krishna. So all creation is part of Krishna itself, in the living entity. What is how to understand what is the difference between the demigods are part of Krishna but we are.
Yeah, so Prabhupada makes the point in the purports also that the demigods are the limbs of Vishnu. Also are the living entities, right? The Brahmanas represent the head, the arms are the Kshatriyas, the torso, the Vaishyas, and the legs, the Shudras.
Creation also is a part of that.
Yeah. So the demigods, remember, they are also Jiva Tattvas. They are part and parcel of Krishna. They are eternal servants of Krishna. But they are Jiva Tattvas. So when we say there are 400,000 species of human life, right? They are the highest in the Jiva Tattva, all the way up to Brahma. Lord Brahma is the highest Jiva Tattva. But still temporary, still a servant of Krishna, dependent on the Supreme Lord. Right? So remember, the demigods are a post. It is a position. It is not a person. Like when we say President of the United States, that is a post occupied by a certain person. So take Lord Indra, for example. Lord Indra is a post that is occupied by different persons. So this post is occupied during the reign of one Manu. 71 Yuga cycles. And then somebody else will occupy that post of Lord Indra, another Jiva Tattva. Lord Brahma is a post occupied by a particular Jiva Tattva. sometimes when there is no qualified Jiva Tattva, Lord Vishnu himself occupies that post. But these are posts occupied. So they move. And that post, that position has a certain function to carry out the material affairs according to the will of the Supreme Lord.
We say it is part of this body part of Krishna, that is the post. It is not a living entity.
Yes, correct. In that position.
So in that sense, we are in Prabhupada quotes so many times that Lord's all senses act all. Like Lord can talk with nose, Lord can accept the bogam, he can eat from eyes, he can means all senses act in all ways. So there is no difference in any senses. Everything acting everywhere. He has head from leg to head, everywhere head, everywhere ears, everywhere his vision is there. In that sense, that means the demigod post, what we are saying, the body of the Lord, it is same. There is no this. We should not differentiate anything. They are all their positions are equal. Yeah, living person, a person at that point place is a living entity. But the position as a post, as a body of the part of limb of the Lord, it is all same. If you see that.
No. It's not the same. So this is this Achintya Beda Beda Tattva. Simultaneously one and different. Right? So we have to understand this, and that's why it's called Achintya. A little bit inconceivable. It's difficult for it. So remember always, the living entity, while it is part of Krishna, so it possesses the same qualities, but it possesses them in very minute quantity. So it is simultaneously one and different. We have to carry both together. So the living entity, being part of Krishna, doesn't carry the same potency of Krishna. So the living entity is limited. Krishna is unlimited.
Now we are just talking about the position as a demigod, as a position we are talking, not about the living entity. As a demigod, as a position, it is a part and limbs of Lord Krishna. So if we take that particular aspect and see all the positions which right now we have all this 33 crore devatas, that means everything is same, everything is part of Krishna, right? It is yeah, of course, once the living entity acquired that position, that is different case. But as a basic theory, everything is the limbs of Krishna, and all limbs of Krishna act in all the way. There is no difference in every limbs, but only it is designated that hand should act in this way, nose should act in this way, leg should act in this way. But they can do all aspects.
No.
That means the position of the demigods, the positions can do any job, anything, they can bestow anything.
Is that true?
That's the conflict in my mind coming.
But what do you know? Can the demigods perform any activity?
With given potency of Lord, if we think it's the limb of the Lord, then he can act any activity.
But do they perform any activity?
But the sake of doing, they will not do.
Is that it? For the sake of doing, they won't do, or they're not able to do?
Because the living entity acquired the position, so Lord will not do all potency to them.
Forget about the logic. I'm just asking in what you have observed with the demigods. Is it for the sake of doing they don't do, or they're unable to do? If the demigods...
They don't have that potency to do.
Exactly.
Lord has the limited potency given to that position.
Exactly. They don't have the potency to do. Otherwise, why the demigods would approach Lord Brahma to request Lord Vishnu to come and perform some help to them, right? We see this in many different pastimes. When there is some disturbance, when there is some trouble, they pray and they approach Because it's not that they don't want to exhibit, they are limited. They cannot exhibit. They cannot perform certain activities. Right? So we're confusing two different topics here. It's okay because it's possible. So let's not, when we say Krishna's form is eternal and unlimited, and any aspect of his form can perform any function, that is there. When we say that the living entities and the demigods constitute the different arms and legs and parts of the body, that is where they originate from. But they don't have that same potency, the multifaceted potency of Krishna. Right? So the potency of both the post and the living entity are limited. So, and that's why we see, this Nitya Nityananam, Chaitanas Chaitananam, Eko Bahunam. So, they're similar, they're all eternal. All eternal. But there is a supreme eternal. That is Krishna, who Eko Bahunam, one who is maintaining all the others. Right? So if I say I'm eternal, Krishna is eternal, we can imply we're the same. But we're not. Right? So we just got to separate those two topics a little bit. And then it'll become clear. And as you observe the different activities of the demigods, we see that. Right? They're not independently capable. They're limited in what they can do. They have great potency compared to you and I. Great potency compared to you and I. But still, relative to Krishna, they're very small. Very, very small. Very insignificant. They're not insignificant, but relative to Krishna, they are. Relative to us, they're very significant and very great in our material understanding. Of course, the pure devotees of the Lord, who are Jiva Tattvas, far surpass even the Devatas. Because their service to Krishna, both are serving Krishna, the demigods and the pure devotees. But the demigods are also serving with some desire. Whereas the devotee is serving with no desire, pure for the pleasure of Krishna. And thus they carry a higher position. Separate point to your question, but so that's how we have to just separate those two a little bit with this body of Krishna, and based on our observance, we see this very clearly. Does that make sense, Prabhu?
So within the body of Krishna, everything is same, but when we add the living entity, there is a limitation.
Yeah. Yes. The fact that we represent or come from the legs of Krishna doesn't mean we bring the exact potency of Krishna's legs. Because you're right, Krishna's legs can eat. But we don't bring that same potency. We come from that, but we don't carry that same ability, right? So that's all. We just have to separate those two. And that's why this achintya beda vedata. The fact that this is a little bit troubling and difficult, that's okay. That's natural. Don't be disturbed by that. Because this is the simultaneously one and different, we don't experience in material realm. Right? Because everything is black and white. But in spiritual world, there is simultaneously one and different. That all seems contradictory, right? When I say simultaneously one and different. But that is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was explaining with this achintya beda beda tattva. That you have to, that's why we have to surrender. Because if we try to understand this with our intelligence, our material intelligence, we're doomed. Because our material intelligence will baffle us. Because when we try to understand eternal, well, when did I separate from Krishna? No, you always existed. No, but at some point I should have separated. No, you always existed. And you're stuck. If we try to reconcile that with our intelligence, will never chant the holy names of the Lord. We'll just try to reconcile that. So instead, we have to surrender to our limited potency to understand that and just accept it. Yes, never was there a time that I did not exist. I'm eternal. Yet, at some point, I emanated from the form of Krishna. I just have to accept it and not try to understand it mechanically, because eventually with our spiritual intelligence, it'll become very clear. But with our material mind, so we just take it as fact on the basis of authorized, bona fide knowledge coming from Krishna. Does that make sense?
So simple, like if I want to explain to someone, like this question comes like, so we can I'm just trying to put in front of you so that you understand it's correct or not. So I can say like a president of the country, a position has the ability to do so many things. But one person acquires that position, it depends on his talent, how much the ability he uses. That is the way I can put it. That's right.
Yes, but don't use that to try to explain that it is the Jiva Tattva's position or the Jiva Tattva occupying that post is what limits the ability. The limiting factor is nobody can be Krishna. Nobody, no thing, nothing can match Krishna. And we have to stop trying to find, because that is ultimately the impersonalists, right? Why they're going through so much speculation and analysis. They're trying to find that opportunity. But it doesn't exist. We just have to accept that we are minute and dependent. We are never independent in all circumstances. So the demigods are also minute and dependent. And so are we. So when trying to explain to somebody, oh, you are worshiping Krishna, I'm worshiping the demigods, you say, yes, but remember the demigods are also worshiping Krishna. Because they are also dependent. They are not independent. So more we can work towards, getting to the post and the Jiva Tattva, that's a level of detail that's maybe hard to kind of put it all together. We can more focus on nobody is independent of the Supreme Lord. There's only one Supreme Lord. They're not all equals. Krishna is one. We are all his eternal servants. Tiny sparks. From the ant,
he makes life easy.
Yeah, from the ant to Lord Brahma, Prabhupada always says, right? From the insignificant ant to Lord Brahma, we are all within one category. Sure, within that category there may be some ups and higher and lower, but within that category, we are all fully dependent on Krishna. So that is what we want to explain. And that's what Krishna is explaining here, right? I am the bestower of those fruits. I am the bestower of the faith. I am the bestower of the process to worship. I am the ability. And we have historical story examples. If the devatas were equal to Krishna, why would they go to Vishnu to beg for assistance? Why? Why they would become bewildered? We see, this is not derogatory in any way, but we see in how many times Lord Indra has performed some misactions, stealing Prithu Maharaj's horse. Why? Like us, because they are fallible. Right? They're fallible. They're less fallible than you and I, but they are fallible. So we can focus on those things to just understand the distinctions. Because Krishna is saying, you don't think you worship one, you all go to the same place. You worship anyone, you go to the same place. No. That is what he's, and he's going to repeat this information in the 9th chapter about the devatas. Because it's a source of big confusion. But it should be very clear.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji, for your detailed question.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Dandavat.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Fantastic lecture, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, I just wanted to, with your kind permission, just wanted to add to your answer, is that, I mean, for anybody, just to clearly understand the difference between Krishna and anybody else, is that other than Krishna, I think so everybody else is governed by the laws of material nature, right, Prabhuji? Even Brahma is governed by the laws. He's a combination of whatever Rajasic guna and a little bit of tamasic. Shiva has got a lot of tamasic guna, and so the laws of material nature, I think so they apply to everybody and anybody other than Krishna
And his pure devotees.
and his pure devotees, right?
So his
Yes.
his pure devotees are free from the laws of material nature. And that's why he says that one can at once transcend the modes. Sagunan samititaitan. Varma bhuyaya kalpate. That one can transcend. So, yes, the first part of your statement was correct. And then, but the pure devotee is never subjected to the laws of material nature. We may see that externally,
Okay.
but the pure devotee is not.
But Prabhuji, on the same note, aren't Brahma and Shiva, they're also all pure devotees, right? Then,
Well, now we get into a little bit technical distinctions. They have aspects of purity.
oh, okay.
So, and that's why, Lord Shiva has a very unique situation, right? Because he is Shambhu Tattva. So he is Vaishnavam Yatha Shambhu.
Yeah.
Topmost Vaishnava. So he is a pure devotee. So I don't, subscribe. He does not come into the understanding. He is not subjected to the modes of material nature.
Oh, he's not, Prabhuji?
Yeah. Now, he performs certain pastimes where we see that, right? And
Right.
particularly the pastime of, when he goes after Krishna.
Right.
So, but it gets into a little bit of detail that maybe, need more time to explain all the intricacies. But we can understand it at the broad level that the pure devotees of the Lord are not subjected to the modes of material nature. They have transcended them. And Krishna is going to say that very, very clearly. By performing devotional service, one can transcend them. Everybody else has influences of the modes of material nature. And then who's a pure devotee, who's not, a little bit more detail. Okay?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhuji, I just had one more. When we are saying Aham Brahmasmi, is it fair? Is it fair for us to say? Can I say Aham Brahmasmi, or is that?
Yeah. We are Brahman. But we are not supreme Brahman. We are spirit soul, part and parcel of Krishna. But we are not Krishna. So there is Brahman and Parabrahman. So Arjuna is going to declare it, right?
Right.
That you are the supreme Brahman. So when we say Aham Brahmasmi, we should not say that I am Krishna. But yes, I am spirit soul. I am eternal. I am Satchitananda. But I am minute in quantity. But again, without good guidance, we will misconstrue Aham Brahmasmi.
But Prabhuji, what is now when I say I am spirit, what is it for the super soul, Prabhuji? Like if I say Aham Brahmasmi, then how do I address Krishna, Prabhuji?
Krishna. Or Param Brahman. He is Param Brahman. And we'll discuss these terms next chapter. But
you make it sound very simple. It's awesome. I like it. Sometimes it's always good to keep it simple.
I am very dumb, so I have to keep it simple. I
I
have to keep it simple.
Yeah.
That way, I don't confuse my own mind. So that's all I can explain.
Oh, I just start this question.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, please.
Hare Krishna. Dandads.
Thank you for your answers.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dharma Pranam. Beautiful class. So it's a wonderful realizations and wonderful questions. Quick question: do you have time, Prabhuji? Or
Yes, Mataji. Always.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so that Bharat Maharaj thing you had mentioned. First of all, I was wondering, he was worshipping the demigods through the yagnas. So, what is that kind of worship, and what is that mood which we are talking about when he's worshipping the demigods? In what way? Why is he doing it? And in what mood is he doing it? And what is the destination then for Bharat Maharaj when he does that in that case?
Yeah. So you can read, I believe it's 7th chapter. It's the first 5 or 6 verses of 7th chapter in 5th canto. I think that's it. If we just look up the Bharat Maharaj, you'll see Prabhupada writes a really nice couple of purports there. And what Bharat Maharaj is doing is he's performing various yagyas. But his mood in performing those yagyas is worshipping the demigods in relationship to Krishna. So he doesn't worship them for the purpose of acquiring a material boon. As soon as he do it, then it's not a spiritual activity. So his worship was, wow, you are wonderful servants of the Supreme Lord Krishna. And so he was glorifying them as servants of Krishna. So that was his mood. So then his destination also becomes spiritual because it was directly linked to Krishna. So his and Prabhupada explains in those purports, I think it's verse 6 or 7, don't quote me, but that this how his mood was and how it led to a spiritual result. Right? So it can be characterized in the mood of devotional service. Because as soon as we connect everything to Krishna, we have clarity of how it exists. Right? So that was his mood of worship, and thus it was not the same type of fruitive mentality in worship, where one is looking to acquire. He wanted nothing from that worship. He didn't have a desire from it. He only wanted to glorify the servants of Krishna. So that was why it leads to a permanent result, not a temporary result.
And you said, Prabhuji, thank you. You said it is in the first 5 or 6 verses in the 7th chapter of 6th canto.
5th
canto. 6th canto?
5th canto. 5th canto, I believe it's chapter 7. And
okay, yeah, I'll find out.
Yes. Yeah. It's in the first 6 or 7 verses.
I just wanted to comment on the questions which were happening right now with Swarna Hari Prabhu and volley of questions between the two of you. Like we are just doing a reading, right? Weekly reading, Chaitanya Charitamrita. So we are finding it very tough to understand it. And Nitya Krishna Mataji really mentioned the same thing. Krishna is so. I mean, we are talking about the Supreme Personality of Krishna out here. So many intricacies into it, so many avatars, so many incarnations, so many things. So if we try to academically try to understand that, it's just not possible because he's so limitless. And that's what I felt when you were explaining to. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
Yeah, and these experiences are good for us. Because why? They're frustrating. And they lead us to surrender. Because I can't understand, I can't grasp it, right? It's a good experience for us because ultimately it should lead us to, okay, just go with it. just surrender to Krishna. Because we are limited. We have such inability to understand this. We can understand the broad principles and see, okay, I can only just surrender to Krishna. But that's why I said in the very opening of this class, if you go back to the beginning, I said knowledge leads to realization when there is humility. Knowledge leads to realization when there is humility. When we understand, okay, it's beyond me, but I accept it as fact. I accept it as fact because it's coming from Krishna, the supreme truth, in perfect Guru Parampara. Not accept it as fact blindly. Accept it as fact because it's coming. Then, but this is the part that's smashing our false ego, and it's there. So it's good to kind of go through this process over and over and over again until we fully become surrendered to Krishna. And like I said in the earlier, when the pure devotee prays for us to become pure devotee, it happens. So we just try to acquire the favorable glance of a pure devotee, and we are safe. That should be our life's mission. Any other questions?
Thank you, Prabhuji.
I guess we have one online question here.
I'm not sure if this was covered already, but Prabhuji, what is the significance of creation of demigods by Krishna?
What is the significance of creation of demigods by Krishna? It's a good question because, Krishna could just carry out these by his will. But he is giving the opportunity for the living entities to render some service, some very important service, in carrying out the material affairs. And so, in order to provide the opportunity to render this type of service, he creates these facilities. And the worship of the demigods is also a process that Krishna explained earlier that is a progressive process ultimately to surrender to Krishna. So one who cannot surrender to Krishna, if they start to surrender at least to the demigods, they'll begin to accept the fact that they are not supreme, that they are limited, and that there is a higher power. And so that worship of the demigods is a progressive state to come to Krishna consciousness. But it's a little bit dangerous because when you begin to worship the demigods and you start to acquire all the results, you can fall away becoming buried in all the lustful tendencies of those material results. But that is the purpose. Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Please forgive me if I misspoke anything and for going a little bit long, but really enjoyed the discussion today, questions and answers. So thank you very much for that. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.